Hello and welcome to a Music in Widescreen interview. We have today for you Roy Stratman of the bands Little Atlas and Strattman. And Strattman will be playing this year's RoSfest. And welcome, Roy.
Thank you for having me, Mark. Hello, everyone.
Now, the first thing I am compelled to ask is Strattman your real last name, or are you just a fan?
It is my real last name. I am actually not a fan of Stratocasters. I've never liked them very much. I mean, I love the sound of them, but they're just not for me. And I don't. I play Parker guitars mostly, and it's funny because at the music store, the guys are always shocked. Oh, and wow.
Yeah, well, I'm not actually surprised about that. How did the playing RoSfest all come together? Did George just reach out to you? Is it as simple as that?
Well, yeah, actually he did. It turns out he was, in the process of selecting bands for RoSfest, and he had my CD for a while and hadn't listened to it. And apparently, I think Jeff Hodges or Steve Carroll from 10T Records gave him a call just to ask him if he'd been listening to, because they'd sent him CDs from some of their artists, and he said, "Oh, I'll check the Strattman out." So he said he had some friends over, and they had some beers and whatnot, and put it on, and apparently thankfully they all loved it, and so he called me and offered me a slot, and I'm thrilled and humbled and honored.
So, well, as long as we're on the topic of RoSfest, you were in the first RoSfest with the band Little Atlas, and how did that all come about, and what was it like in the prog world at that time? That was right about when I was starting to do a show, and we had a small list of bands that we liked. For us, it's much different. How was it for you back in 2004?
Well, at the time, there were quite a few that we at that time there was, Prog Day, which is still going on, at least hopefully. There was, I guess, Cal Prog, just had ended. There was Baja Prog was going, and of course the big one was Nearfest. And we were at the time a gigging band. I mean, we were really hot at that time. We were playing like crazy out. It was right before we released our second album, Wanderlust, and Steve, George had called Steve, offered him a slot in RoSfest. We were thrilled, and it was literally one of the best times ever. I'm so glad that George took the plunge and the risk to make that happen, and it's really amazing that he's kept it together for 11 years.
Well, I think part of the success for RoSfest and its longevity has to do with really the love fest that just kind of goes on there. Most people go there knowing about 30% of the audience, and I would say there's about 700 of us or so that just really enjoy the music, and we appreciate the artists coming out, and it's a very nice show. So it must be really nice kind of coming here full circle after 11 years.
It is. It's amazing. It's kind of surreal, and we're just buckling down at this point and trying to make sure we put on the best show possible, and we've got a new 17-minute piece that I've written for the show, and that's going to be premiered or debuted there, and we are also playing a cover which I won't divulge at the moment.
Well, nor would we want you, but that's exciting. I knew there had to be some new material going up there, as it's you've got an hour and a half there and one album. So is there going to be a home for that 17-minute song, or what's the game plan for there?
I've over the past year, I've got a lot of ideas down, recorded, and ready to go. I have that 17-minute piece, and I intend to turn that into a whole album. If I'm, hopefully it'll be, an album with the same members. And this time, I plan on, giving a lot of the jobs to the people in the band rather than just trying to do everything myself, to get a little bit their flavor involved. So we'll see how that goes out, and hopefully I can use the same guys that are going to be playing with me at RoSfest. I'm hoping that this sort of solidifies us as a band.
And speaking of the band, for those of you who don't know, Roy did not only lead vocals and guitar, but also did the keyboards. And also, well, he had a special guest with some street cred, of course. Nick DiVirgilio you had on drums. How did that all come about?
Yeah, I was thrilled to have Nick play on the album. The original intention was to have Mark Hubry play on the album, who's my current drummer. The problem was he had a elbow injury at the time, and it was going to take a few months to get better. So, and I was under a couple of deadlines, so I got Nick DiVirgilio to do it, and I intend to have Mark do the drums on the second album. And let me tell you, Mark is going to be he's one of those people that's going to just blow people's minds. I mean, when you see him, he is amazing. He can do everything Nick DiVirgilio did on the album, and of course he's got his own flavor also. So I think people are going to be impressed with Mark.
Well, after going to about 8 of these things, I'm sure you'll be well received. The Saturday morning slot is a good spot to be. I think people will be ready to go, not burnt out by 11 bands, and although there'll be a few people that have stayed out too late on Friday, I think there'll be a very receptive audience, and I think they'll really appreciate what you're doing. So I was going to ask you then, this might be asking what your favorite child is, but I was wondering, what was your favorite song, and then I'll let you know if you were right or not.
It's funny. The other day I was talking to a friend about what my favorite Pink Floyd album was, and it's funny because it's sort of contaminated by over-listening. Dark Side of the Moon, I've rubbed it in the ground so much that if I was to listen to it all with fresh ears, that would probably be my favorite. And the same thing happens with my songs. I get tired of a certain one or anything. But I think overall, I would say probably my favorite is track 6, Detonation.
Oh, that was really close, and I'm sorry. No, it is not your favorite song.
You're going to say number 3, Candle in the Sun?
No, I really do like Candle in the Sun, that's for sure. But the song that really got me was Soulless.
It's funny because throughout, I've been married for, 17 years now, and my wife is all throughout the years is, you're a musician, you've never written me a song, and so finally after 16 years, I doodling on a song, and she's from Spain, so for a little joke, I originally, when I was recording the song, for a little joke, I just went into a little flamenco part, and then after I showed it to her and we all had a good laugh and listened to it, I was like, well, that actually sounds pretty good, so I developed it.
Yeah, well, that's the part of the song that really makes it for me. I mean, the first 4 minutes, just kind of a nice melody, nothing specifically extravagant or even proggy, but right at that 4-minute mark, that is a really cool segment, and the whole band joins in about the 4:40 mark, and I just think it's a real goosebump moment for me, and I think it's going to go over very well.
Oh, well, thanks. I'm happy to hear that. And, in that also, under that clapping, it's a cajon. I don't know if you're familiar with Steve will be playing the cajon at RoSfest, so make sure nobody misses that.
So as I was preparing for this interview, I was listening to the album a couple times, and it just, I kind of put star ratings next to each song, helps me with the show, and I just have, just more than average stars on A Better World, Caught Inside the Rain, A Candle in the Sun, Detonation, Solace, Lie of the Beholder, Connections Lost, and actually one that kind of percolated up a little bit for me this time through was No Way Home. I think that's a very strong track.
That's funny. I would say that's like definitely one. I couldn't decide between that and Detonation. That was the other one I was thinking, and that was actually the last one that I wrote for the album. So I wrote it the most recently, and I really like that one. I love the feel of it.
Well, we do this award show every year, and we have Best Debut Album, and I really can't believe that this is probably the best album that has not won the debut album. We had some really good competition there with Cell 15, and Heliopolis, who will also be playing RoSfest, excitingly enough. And I think that this album is really good. It's going to be very difficult to follow up um, with the second album and live up to this album.
Well, thanks. That's an excellent compliment. I really appreciate that. And of course, my only option here is to kind of try to do something a little different for the second album. My intention is to. I can see myself sort of leaning in another kind of direction, a little less heavy, a little more groovy. So we'll see what comes out. It always comes out different than you plan anyway. So everything I'm saying right now could be meaningless.
So certainly as fans and as musicians, everybody wants you to grow and expand. But is there anything? Is there a thread that would be linking all your work together? Or it's a tough question, but do you have a mission statement for the work that you do?
Tough question, and I'm going to give maybe a little bit of a lame answer, but I think I stay true. And what I mean by that is, in the past I've made this mistake, and I will never make it again. And it's trying to, while I'm creating and writing, trying to keep in mind what other people might like, and anytime you do that, you're basically just causing yourself to fail. And instead, I'm always trying to say, just stay true to what I'm doing and what I think is good, and don't think about the music as a business or money or selling or getting big or anything. Just do what I think is good, and that's it. And if nothing happens with it, well, nothing happens with it. But you have to do what you believe in and stay true.
Well, I think that every artist probably struggles with that to a point. And it's great that you're able to serve your own needs and people enjoy it. That's really the best of both worlds. And it's got to be difficult that in being derivative of maybe things that you like or previous albums. I can't imagine how difficult that.
That's hard. That's very hard to do. Yeah, I find you wouldn't believe if you could hear the things that were edited out of the 100% of music that I wrote for this album, 25% of it made it to the album. So there's 3 or 4 times more music that didn't make it because it sounded too derivative or I didn't like it. It's amazing how my perception changes from time to. I can spend 4 hours all night writing and recording something that I think is awesome, and then the next day when I listen to it in the car, I'm like, that was just not good, and.
So I hear this a lot too. Well, it's difficult to stop writing and knowing when you're done with a song. Do you struggle with that?
That's another weakness of mine in terms of writing and creating. I take so long to do that process because I'll listen to it, and then over the period of a week or so, I'll say, you know what, this part needs to change, and I'll change it. Then I'll listen to it again, and then I'll see another part that needs to change. And the beauty of this album, it took me 3 years to write it, but I went through that process and kept changing until I really did not want to change anything else. I mean, I was like, you know what, I've gotten to the point. I've made it as perfect as I can, and there's nothing I want to change about it. So that was a luxury because sometimes you have time constraints and you can't go through that whole process. Then later, you listen to an album that you've released going, wow, I wish I could have done this and that and this. And, well, hopefully I'll have no regrets on this one. I don't so far.
I do know a lot of bands struggle with that. And especially after playing live, they decide they really wish they would have done something else with the studio.
Yeah, that's another thing. That was the beauty of the Little Atlas album, Wanderlust. That particular album, we gigged and played pretty much the whole album out for a year or two before we actually recorded it. So that was a luxury.
That's great. You're able to do that before laying down those tracks. Must have been. It's kind of difficult, I would expect, for you to play a bunch of songs that maybe nobody's ever heard before. Even the people that did happen to hear your first album. Did you struggle with that at all?
Yeah, well, that's a problem with progressive rock, I think. The fact that, it really takes 4 or 5 listens for it to start sinking in, and most people won't give it that kind of a chance. They'll listen once, and all of my favorite albums, Yes, Relayer, and you know, I didn't like it first. I mean, I didn't hate them. I just didn't particularly like them. And then it takes like 4 or 5 listens, and some of the melodies start sticking. You get some earworms in there, and then you start liking it. So the prog artists have it really tough in that sense, and that's when you're playing a gig live. Obviously, when you go to a show, it's much more fun to know the music, and when you're watching a show, and it takes a little bit of the fun out of it, not knowing the music. But what can you do? You're, yeah, well, yeah, I do the same thing, and of course that means you're an experienced listener. Yeah, but and another thing I've noticed in respect to this is that the music that gives me instant gratification, that I like right away, it does usually has no staying power. I'll get tired of it really fast, and it won't be one of those albums that I'll come back to years and years and years later. Yeah. Yeah, I always loved the non-hit tracks, and I was, man, it's funny you mentioned Billy Joel, because Billy Joel was like the soundtrack for my childhood. I was, huge into Billy Joel growing up. Yeah, what a, yeah, I mean, he's brilliant. I tell you, I saw him in December and January actually here in Miami, and let me tell you, he hasn't lost it. He's got it. He's just excellent. Yeah, that happens. That's happened. It's almost like that's happened more often than not to artists, huh? On my small scale of dealing with things, I have a huge distaste for that whole side of the business, that whole business side of the thing. I hate having to deal with that kind of stuff. So I can see how it'd be so easy to turn it over to someone, you know. I'm fairly certain there were 4 bands each day, and yeah, 4 bands each day. I think that's the same format, right? Yeah. Well, thanks, Mark. Yeah, I'm thrilled. I'm pretty thrilled to have that spot. Also, yeah, those are some nice advantages that you mentioned. Absolutely. Ah, thanks. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing you. All right. Thanks a lot, Mark. See you at Fest. All right.